First up, Dr. Nick Schofield, who is the Chief Executive of the Australian Water Partnership and has, well, I don't know if I should tell them how many years, Nick, of experience working in the arena of water resources. Nick's actually a physicist by original training, which, I mean, well, I don't really know what that means about you, except that you're probably very exacting with evidence, is my guess. But I think it'll be really interesting to hear a bit about the realities of this tricky business of water resources management. We're really looking forward to hearing from you. Thanks very much.
Good morning, everybody, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Barbara, for that quick introduction. I should say I entered water 4 decades ago at the University of Leeds, and I went in at the postdoc level, having completed a PhD in astrophysics. So it was a little bit of a change of direction, but the skills in modelling are quite transferable. So a few months ago, I was invited by the organising committee to offer a keynote, trying to build a bridge or link between WASH and water resource management, and pondered that now for several months, and more intensely for the last few weeks, and I've called upon colleagues far and close to assist my thinking on this, and I haven't still quite solved the problem. But we're going to give it a shot. So I'm just going to give a bit of a background about, the global perspective, what we might call the global water crisis, some of those challenges that are playing out in water resource management and WASH, and then focus my presentation mostly around the integration question, WASH and water, and how that plays out, and then some case studies from Australia on how we've managed mostly in the water resources management sector, the integration question. And of course, being from the Australian Water Partnership, I'll end up with some of the work that we're doing through that partnership. So, of course, most of you are aware that there is something around we call the global water crisis. It's very much in the WASH sector a humanitarian crisis, and we've seen the massive statistics around that. It's also, part of what you might call the, larger global sustainability mega crisis. And water features very strongly in that. And to me, what it's all about really is the habitability of this planet for species and humans. And you can see in that graph at the bottom there, the freshwater living planet index has been crashing since the 70s. So 80% decline in populations of freshwater species in that short period of time. And it's just an indicator that, things aren't all well in the water sector globally, and this planet is becoming less habitable, both for all species. There are some good stories that exist and progress is being made, but the threats themselves are escalating. So for the WASH sector, it's really important to understand what's happening in the broader water sphere in WRM, and likewise for WRM to better understand the WASH sector and to establish better links there. But integration, as we call it, is tricky, and it's often difficult to implement. So just a bit further on this global water risks concept, this is the World Economic Forum, who publish a very nice analysis of global risks every year, and this is a 2018 result. So since 2012, water's come on the agenda for the last 5 so years. It's been in the top 5. In 2015, it was the #1 risk. One of the challenges on the WASH and WRM integration question is that we tend to operate at different scales. I've tried to capture that in this diagram with the WASH there at the centre, operating at the domestic community level largely. WRM's water resource management sort of geographic scale is primarily at the basin scale. And then we've got all these global kind of level issues going on at the global scale, climate change, biodiversity loss, and so on. But the purpose of this diagram is, through those arrows, is to show that if you're in the WASH sector, then you are every day impinged by these global forces and also by what's going on in basins around you, whether that's some extreme events, particular land development process, water scarcity or flooding from droughts. But if you're in the WRM sector, you're also influenced by what the WASH sector is doing. Probably not quite so strongly, but the impacts are there nevertheless. Here I've just attempted to describe some ways in which these challenges on a global, larger scale impinge on WRM and WASH, often slightly differently. So if we take climate change, what the WRM people worry about is, changing rainfall patterns, sea level rise, melting glaciers, all those kind of things. If you're in the WASH sector, how you feel it is, more unpredictable water supply, generally less habitable conditions. If you're looking at, say, water demand and scarcity, so in the WRM sector, you worry about the big water users, the hydropower industry, manufacturing, agriculture, requirements of people in urban centres, recognising that demand's rising rapidly across all those sectors, increasing physical scarcity. If you're in the WASH sector, you realise that the key issue is people can't afford to pay for their water supply or sanitation, so economic water scarcity is very important. If you look at, say, and I won't go through all of these, say, pollution and water quality, it's increasing rapidly on a global scale. Some successes in some first world countries, extremely expensive to fix up. Fixing up the quality, river quality, and biology of the River Rhine, was 90 billion euros. Even locally, fixing up the Brisbane River and the Moreton Bay is tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars. So there's big dollars associated with turning these pollution situations around. In the WASH sector, of course, the untreated wastewater clearly going out into the environment, affecting downstream users. So all these things are linked together and come together, of course, in the new global response through the SDGs, the 2030 Agenda, which is very water-centric. And you can see in the diagram on the left there, the beautiful diagram from UNESCAP, a real piece of artwork, how WASH is linked to all the other 16 SDGs. And water is very prominent in 8 of them. And SDG 6 itself is the first attempted bridge between WASH and sustainable water management. Our final point there, though, is that we need practical ways of integrating these approaches, and that's going to be critical to the success, particularly of SDG 6. So what are people finding in the field? People have been out there trying, experimenting this bridge, and these are some of the reflections from practitioners in terms of what benefits they see in integrating across that spectrum. And the first one, and the primary one, is interdependence. So when WASH and WRM both need to work together to get a successful outcome, when they're completely interdependent, then there's a lot of energy and will to do it. Water poverty and environment are clearly deeply connected. Communities that live in high biodiversity, biodiversity hotspots, high degrees of endemism, often some of the poorest communities on the planet. Watershed management, watershed conservation is tremendously important to sustain, provide freshwater resources and safe water for drinking, as it is for managing impacts of climate change, extreme events and the like. And of course, the benefit from the WRM sector working with WASH can be to help reduce wastewater pollution and to work with and engage with local communities more effectively. But some of the challenges that have come out from practitioners, and the first one and foremost is the geographic mismatch. There's just the scale at which these two sectors operate. I consider IWRM, Integrated Water Resource Management, to be a great framework, but often too broad, too all-encompassing to apply at the local level. Integration projects are harder work, there's no question about it. You need more patience, more time, it's more sophisticated, requires more effort, a lot more effort on building and maintaining relationships. You run a bigger risk that the projects are larger and more complex. They often require more complicated solutions from a technical point. Sometimes there's a bit of thing about funding. WASH often attracts funding, and you connect it to WRM, and the funding is not so, funders aren't so enthused. And the point made yesterday that these sectors have a different knowledge base, different language, and some cultural differences. So some of the barriers. So I'm going to draw on some case studies from the Australian water experience. And as you can see there, Australia has faced and does face many of the challenges that experienced in other countries, whether it's extreme weather, water scarcity, survival of rural towns, pollution and ecological decline. You won't be able to read all this, but Australia's been on a water reform journey since 1990. It's been largely a policy-led process, not a science or a technical-led one. And it's had some broad objectives about improving the productivity and efficiency of Australia's water use, whilst maintaining the health of the river and groundwater resources. And it's done that by 4 pillars of action. So improving environmental management, transforming water allocation, reforming water pricing, and modernising institutional arrangements. That's all been supported by a lot of effort on improving water information and knowledge management, and a lot of community and stakeholder engagement. This diagram is a nice one because it captures the whole water reform effort, but I'll leave it for another day to go through that in detail. I do, though, want to talk about a number of case studies, the first one being Australia's famous, iconic Murray-Darling Basin, a serious attempt at integrated basin planning, really tackling this integration issue head-on. So back in the 1990s, the basin was going into rapid decline. The actual mouth of the river was closing off. We had the world's largest 1,000-kilometre algal bloom. River woodlands were dying off. Wetland bird populations were in rapid decline. Salinisation was evident. So this was driven to a large extent by over-allocation and overuse of the available water resources in the basin. And you can see the arrow and the blue showing the increase in water use over time. And as that more and more water was allocated to irrigation, additional problems occurred, starting from salinity, then disconnection of floodplains, closing of the Murray Mouth, algal blooms, to the point the states that were part of the basin said enough is enough. We'll put a cap on diversions, no more water for irrigation and other uses. That is a limit. And then subsequent to that, the Basin Plan was developed, and a very extensive scientific analysis of what is the sustainable limit to the water resource. How much can you actually take out and maintain a healthy system? And at that point it's realized the system was over-allocated, overused, and water needed to be taken back from consumption and put back to the environment. This is a rather wordy slide, apologise for that, but it to me represents, a big part of what this integration challenge is and how complex it is. And it relates to the fundamentals of really where we've got with sustainability, and that's around really optimising cross-water uses and water values. So we need to optimise somehow for human water needs, for industries like irrigation, for the environment, for urban, domestic use, hydropower manufacturing, and so on. How do we allocate waters optimally between those, whilst taking into account climate change and variability, the interactions between surface and groundwater, water quality issues, salinity, and the like, and also cultural needs, aesthetic, spiritual, and recreation. So this was the challenge, and it's utilised a whole suite of different strategies, from master planning, water planning for every individual catchment, some high policy innovation around separating water and land rights, establishing water entitlements for all users, and allocating water on an annual basis, being able to transfer and move water around through water markets, the sustainable diversion limits for each catchment being established, setting up environmental watering regimes for 30,000 wetlands in the basin and a number of World Heritage sites, cultural flows for Indigenous communities, the whole modernisation of the irrigation sector, understanding flow and flow constraints through the system, putting in place a very extensive modelling basis to help that management and make it work day to day, of course monitoring and compliance, and last but not least, stakeholder management. So apologies for the length of that. I picked out a few of the important things here. So this is a transboundary system. The institutional arrangements were critical to making all this work, and you can see on the top right there the table with all the governments, the 5 governments sat around the table, is crucial to have the institutions, the planning, the legislation, the policies, and all lined up at the Commonwealth and replicated across the states, and in each of those individual water resource plans that need to align to the master plan. Environmental watering was groundbreaking, so Australia has been a world leader in understanding watering for the environment, environmental flows, watering requirements for wetlands and the like. But it's been a leader not because it's just been able to work out how much you need, but how to implement it, how to allocate it, and putting it in place and making it work. Put enormous amount of effort into improving the water efficiency of the irrigation sector, which is uses 70% of the water in the basin. It's 80% of Australia's irrigation agricultural output. And this is a whole range of techniques and technologies to improve your water efficiency, from lining channels, different types of drip irrigation, micro sprays, fully telemetered delivery system, highly automated. So any irrigator can at any time order how much water he wants to deliver to his property any day next week. So it's a highly technical system. One of the major innovations is through water markets, because water markets is the mechanism where all the users can operate. They can buy and sell their water. And that, in a sense, is what governs the price and optimises the system, the silent hand of the market. And there's an enormous amount of innovation starting with the separation of land and water rights, establishing water entitlements for every individual user, building a market and the rules around that, providing annual allocations depending on the availability of water, and allowing permanent and temporary transfers with different products. You see in that diagram on the left the effect of the water market at work. So we go through in 2007 the peak of a massive drought, the most intense drought in eastern Australia in recorded history. And so the amount of water stored in blue there in the dams, it gets very, very low. But because you're in a water market, the price gets very, very high. And then water's only used by people who can afford it at that high price. So the net outcome of that is water moving to higher value uses, the ability to adapt to drought. It frees up market entry and exit, and government is in a role to purchase water for environmental uses. And whilst in that bottom right there, the water availability went down 53%, the net production only dropped 21% with the market at play. Stakeholder engagement's critical. I'll just make the point here that we see a lot in the news, the burning of the Basin plan, states up in arms, they're going to withdraw from the plan because they're not getting their own way, or scientists saying, that the plan's not doing enough for the environment, and people say, oh, well, the whole thing's gone up in flames. Well, literally, but it's really the system at work. That's how it's supposed to work. It's a dynamic system. Everybody has to have a voice, and the system has to be able to manage that, and it does. And the plan's still there, and I'm sure it'll stay there for a long time. I got a second case study on Perth's integrated water supply response to climate change. I put this one in because Perth, more than any other city worldwide, has been subject to climate change through the reduction in rainfall and runoff, as seen in that diagram. It's now a fraction of what it was in the 1970s. So if you can see that, that's the declining water supply into the dams which once supplied all of Perth's water. That's the population increasing over time quite rapidly. That's the water supplied. And this is the different contributions made initially by dams. Once the dam water ran out, we moved to groundwater. Once the groundwater moved out, moved to desalination. And there's still, as the population grows, a need to find additional sources, which is now found by managed aquifer recharge of the wastewater treated from the city and then reused. And over and above that was very strong demand management processes put in from the household to community level to reduce the demand so that not so much water needs to be supplied per capita for the same benefits. A third case study, briefly, that Australia's pioneered, and I think was very relevant to the WASH and WRM sector, and that's the Alliance for Water Stewardship. It's set up over 7 years an international water standard that enables any industry to go through a number of steps, these 6 steps here, and gain or achieve or partly achieve this international water stewardship standard. Now, the second step there is understanding not only the risks at your particular site, but also at the catchment level. And this was the big innovation in the program. This is a real bridge, but site-specific to catchment level. And you see here this example in Indonesia is actually a WASH example where a farm planning's been developed under the Water Stewardship Programme, but also a whole series of catchment management on the right there through a community-led process, enabling the improvement of water supply and water quality at a catchment level. So this mechanism can be applied directly to WASH as well as to industries. I'm running out of time, but Australia has recently pioneered a new WaterGuide to tackle water scarcity globally. It's obviously a massively increasing problem. This is the WaterGuide with 6 steps. And the purpose of the WaterGuide really is to take these very sophisticated, Murray-Darling Basin kind of management scenarios and break it down into some simple steps that a country that's just starting out on this journey can understand what's needed to build up that kind of level of management bit by bit. And this has now been applied in Jordan, Iran, Mexico, shortly in Senegal and the Philippines. And the kind of things, besides broad understanding, so it's the application in Iran that comes out of this, is identifying areas of collaboration going forward. So having applied this process, the Iranians are now asking the Australian government through the Australian Water Partnership to assist in a couple of areas: environmental water management and water trading. I'm going to touch on, I'm going to skip through a few slides because Mark's giving me the 1-minute warning. There's a whole range of international integration frameworks that bring their own contribution to this question. And then the Australian Water Partnership itself is an organisation 2.5 years old, which is set up to connect Australia's water expertise to the needs of developing countries. So this vision to be great water partners for development, working on sustainable water management and making a difference by mobilising the Australian expertise to address the needs and demands, not to sell solutions or technologies, but to really be responsive to what the needs are at the time they're needed. We have a Young Water Professionals program, and I'm delighted to be part of the Global Young Water Cafe this morning. Thank you very much for that experience. And we're running programs across the Pacific and in Myanmar. That's a bit about our model. It's a demand-led model, and we design the response. And here's just a few examples of our work. An integrated environmental, social, and economic assessment in Myanmar, a country that's just come out of a period of military rule and really starting from scratch in terms of its water management. We do twinning projects. Here's an example between water utilities from Australia and Vietnam. And this, I think, is quite helpful to the WASH sector because water utilities have the responsibility for the provision of clean water and for sanitation services. So so through this twinning, we find a number of utilities, in this case in Vietnam, and then we match them with like utilities in Australia, like scale, like problems, like issues, and then we organise them to work together on issues like asset management, water safety plans, non-revenue water, so on and so forth. It's very successful. It works very well. It's a two-way beneficial program. We're redesigning water-sensitive cities, thank you, Mark, in India, and through the CRC for water-sensitive cities. And taking this is the journey of urban water from water supply cities through to water-sensitive cities. And this is the leapfrogging concept. So in India, we're designing a whole water-sensitive brand new city in Andhra Pradesh, at the same time refurbishing an existing city. We have a strong gender equality, social inclusion program. And my final slide, a few lessons to draw out from these case studies. So from the Murray-Darling Basin, the key thing to me is markets if you can get to that point, can optimize across multiple uses and values. And that's kind of a frontier in a sense of sustainable management. And in that case, ongoing effective stakeholder engagement is critical. The Perth water supply example is about how in a fairly short period of time through climate change, your water supply options can change dramatically. And you have to find new sources and new integrated solutions fairly quickly. The Alliance for Water Stewardship, noting the links between what you can do with industry, you can do for WASH in taking you from site to catchment. And the WaterGuide message is around how we can break down the fairly sophisticated levels of management into smaller steps that could apply equally to WASH. Thank you for your attention. Please come and visit us at the AWP stand. Thank you.